It is the sweltering summer of 1945, deep in the heart of a Pacific War-torn landscape. The sun has just begun its relentless climb above a tangle of makeshift barracks, surrounded by scorched earth and tangled brush that whispers of years of conflict. The air is thick with the mingled scent of salt, sweat, and the faint, lingering metallic tang of old gunfire. For 6 long months, these women, Japanese prisoners of war, have endured deprivation, disease, and despair in silence. Their eyes, hollow yet defiant, flicker nervously at every shadow, every distant sound of military activity. The world beyond the camp is a haze of smoke and shattered buildings, but within the fences, a smaller, quieter battle rages, a struggle for dignity, for relief, for a simple human necessity that has been cruelly denied. The groan of wooden floors beneath weak feet, the shuffling of tattered clothing over dirt, streaked skin, the whisper of reluctant camaraderie among the captives, all form a haunting symphony of endurance. And now, as Allied engineers and medics arrive with clean water and makeshift bathing facilities, hope flickers like a fragile candle in the oppressive gloom. Every woman's gaze is fixed on this small miracle, this act of compassion that feels almost impossible amidst so much suffering. In this moment, time stretches thin, and anticipation hangs heavy like morning fog over the camp. The first splash of water rang out like an unexpected bell in a cathedral long abandoned, startling in its clarity and warmth. A single Japanese woman stepped forward hesitantly, her body trembling from both cold and disbelief, as if confronting a sensation she had forgotten existed. Her feet sank into the soft, uneven dirt beneath her, darkened from months of neglect and constant use, and her hands clutched the coarse cloth of her uniform to her chest, as though it were both armor and shield. Every step she took carried the weight of long, endured suffering, the memory of months spent without relief, etched into the lines of her face, into the tautness of her skin and the hollow of her eyes. She paused, staring at the stream of steaming water cascading from the crude wooden spout, as if unsure that such a luxury, such a simple and fundamental kindness, could be real. Her breath caught in her throat, shallow and quick, mixing with the faint metallic tang of the rusted barrels around her, the scent of hot iron and wet wood merging strangely with the sharp tang of soap. For months, the women had been denied even the most basic comforts, denied water sufficient for washing, denied the relief of warmth and cleanliness. Now, the water rushed over her hands first, shocking her with its heat and sudden sensation, and she inhaled sharply, shivering, eyes squeezed tight against the torrent. It flowed over her shoulders, down her arms, washing away layers of grime, sweat, and despair, and with it, she felt an almost unrecognizable sensation of renewal creeping into her stiff muscles, her parched skin, her frayed nerves. Around her, the camp was alive with sound in a way it had not been for months. The groan of old wood beneath tired feet, the soft shuffle of tattered cloth dragging along dusty ground, the whisper of hesitant encouragement from the women waiting in line. All these small noises created a tentative rhythm, a fragile symphony of human endurance that had been silenced for far too long. Voices were low and careful at first, hesitant to break the invisible barrier of disbelief. But even in their whispers, there was a tremor of hope. One woman spoke softly to another, a reassuring word, a shared memory of distant home, a reminder that they were still alive. Another covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a laugh at the absurdity of finding joy in such a basic act. A laugh that quickly turned into a quiet sob as the water splashed over her own feet, cool and invigorating. The scent of the clean water mingled with the earthy, metallic odors of the camp, creating an almost intoxicating aroma that felt foreign and intoxicating, an invisible comfort that filled the lungs and seeped into the skin. Every woman in line was drawn forward by a mixture of fear and desire, the same two forces that had guided them through months of captivity, fear of punishment or disapproval, desire for relief, desire for a reminder of what it meant to be human. Hands that had been roughened by work, by survival, by scraping and clawing in a world that had offered them little, reached for the water with careful reverence. Fingers brushed against skin, tentative at first, unsure if the sensation was allowed, if it was safe, if it could exist in a place defined by hardship. When the water ran over arms, shoulders, and the tangled knots of hair matted with sweat and dirt, the women gasped, some audibly, others silently, their eyes closing in astonishment as they allowed themselves the smallest indulgence to feel softness, warmth, and care after months of neglect. The steam rose from the makeshift wooden tubs, curling in gentle wisps that caught the early sunlight, shimmering faintly in the hazy, dusty air of the camp. It carried the aroma of wet wood and freshly poured water, a fragrance that seemed almost sacred after the months of deprivation. The women's hair, once stiff and lifeless from weeks of accumulated dirt, began to yield to the water, strands falling free, glistening with moisture, clinging to their shoulders and faces. Each drop that ran down their cheeks seemed to carry away not only the physical filth, but the invisible weight of despair, the months of exhaustion, the unspoken fear and hunger that had been their constant companions. Nearby, Allied soldiers and medics moved carefully, deliberately, with an awareness of the gravity of the moment. Each gesture was measured, each bucket poured with gentle precision, as if aware that this was more than mere hygiene. The women, though exhausted, sensed the care and respect in every movement, and their initial hesitancy began to shift into cautious trust. Eyes darted from one figure to another, noting the absence of harshness, the absence of scolding or command, and in that absence, they found a freedom that had been denied for months. Some laughed softly, voices cracking under the weight of long suppressed emotion, while others wept quietly, tears mingling with the flowing water, indistinguishable from the cleansing streams that slid over their skin. The tactile pleasure of warmth and wetness, the sensation of slick soap and the gentle friction of hands running through tangled hair, became almost overwhelming, a sensory feast after months of deprivation. The camp, usually filled with the oppressive smell of unwashed bodies, dust, and sweat, now carried the scent of fresh water, faint soap, and the earthiness of moist soil, creating an olfactory tapestry that signaled the presence of care of humanity. Every splash, every drip of water, became a small event, a microcosm of hope and restoration. Women bent forward to rinse their hair, craning their necks to allow the water to run fully, fingers combing through the knots, with a combination of determination and reverence. Some clutched pieces of coarse cloth or scraps of towel, pressing them to their skin as they scrubbed and wiped, reveling in the sensation of friction that carried away layers of grime, sweat, and self-consciousness. Around them, the medics watched, offering quiet guidance, a nod here, a gentle instruction there, always careful to avoid imposing authority, and instead allowing the women to reclaim control over their own bodies, their own sense of self. A few women dared to lift their faces fully to the water, letting it pour over closed eyes, over dry and cracked lips, over skin long unwashed, and each small act of indulgence was met with a ripple of awe and relief from those nearby. The sound of water hitting wooden surfaces, mixing with the soft murmurs of women, created an almost hypnotic rhythm, a melody of renewal that spread quietly through the camp, reaching every ear and every corner. Some women knelt, submerging hands and arms fully in the cool, steaming water, marveling at the sensation that had become almost alien. Others stretched their limbs fully, tilting heads back as they allowed the stream to run along neck and shoulders, feeling muscles relax, tension ebb, and months of suffering wash away. Eyes closed, hearts pounding, breaths deep and shuddering, they surrendered to the moment, allowing themselves to exist purely in sensation and relief, unburdened even for a few fleeting minutes by the relentless grind of captivity. Whispers of encouragement floated through the camp, words carried softly from one woman to another, tiny threads of connection and solidarity that had survived the months of hardship and now bloomed in the most fragile and beautiful ways. Each touch of hand to skin, each careful pouring of water, became a symbolic gesture of humanity, a declaration that even amidst suffering, care and kindness could exist, and that the simplest acts, clean water, warmth, touch, could carry profound meaning. By the time the first woman stepped out from under the cascading water, skin pink and glistening, hair slicked and softened, the rhythm of the camp had shifted. Hesitance was replaced with tentative courage, fear with curiosity, and despair with cautious joy. Others followed, each carrying their own blend of anxiety, hope, and anticipation, and as the line grew, the camp was transformed. What had been a place of silence and oppression was now filled with the subtle symphony of dripping water, soft laughter, murmured words, and occasional bursts of sobs. Even the sunlight seemed to linger longer, catching on droplets of water, glinting on damp hair, and glimmering across the makeshift wooden structures, turning them from bleakness into a stage for rebirth. It was not just a moment of hygiene, it was a reclamation of dignity, an affirmation that despite months of suffering, the human spirit could still recognize and embrace mercy and care when offered. The first splash had sparked a wave, small but unstoppable, one that promised warmth, relief, and the restoration of something far deeper than mere cleanliness. As the hours slowly stretched on, the camp seemed to awaken in ways it hadn't for months, almost as though the simple act of flowing water had breathed life back into the very soil beneath their feet. Hesitant movements at first began to gain confidence. The line of women waiting for the baths, once tentative and unsure, gradually lengthened as curiosity and cautious hope began to outweigh fear. Each woman carried the weight of months of neglect and suffering, and yet now, with water waiting and warmth streaming from crude wooden spouts, there was something transformative in the way they stood, the way they adjusted their posture as they approached. Their feet, bare or clad in tattered sandals, sank slightly into the soft, dusty earth, leaving faint imprints that would quickly vanish, like ephemeral traces of hope pressed into a landscape long scarred by conflict. Every step toward the flowing water was a negotiation between trepidation and longing, a careful balance of fear, and the almost desperate need to reclaim something as simple and essential as cleanliness. Some whispered to one another, voices low, careful, testing the waters of language that had long been subdued by months of scarcity and caution. "Do you think it is real?" one asked, her words trembling but threaded with a cautious excitement. Another answered in a quiet murmur, nodding. "It is real. It is really here." The exchange, though small, carried immense weight, a tiny testament to the power of hope to spark courage where despair had ruled for so long. A woman at the front of the line dipped a hand into the barrel first, feeling the gentle warmth against her skin, and the collective intake of breath among the observers was almost audible. A chorus of wonder and relief mingled with disbelief. There were small smiles, quiet chuckles, and a tremor of laughter that seemed almost foreign in the camp's harsh environment. For months, their senses had been dulled by deprivation, dulled by the constant smell of unwashed bodies, the tang of dirt and sweat, the relentless heat of the sun on their bodies unshielded from comfort. Now, every drop of clean water felt almost miraculous, every splash a renewal, every rinse a reclamation of what it meant to be human. As one woman lifted her face under the pouring water, closing her eyes to savor the sensation fully, the sunlight caught the droplets as they cascaded down her cheeks, glinting like tiny jewels. Each drop seemed to carry away not just grime, but a heavy layer of months, long fatigue, worry, and resignation. The air around the baths began to fill with steam, rising in gentle curls that caught the light in a soft, hazy glow, mixing with the faint aroma of soap that soldiers had managed to procure. The smell was foreign, almost intoxicating after months of the camp's oppressive scents, and it carried with it a promise that cleanliness and care were not impossible, that comfort and dignity could, at least for a moment, exist even here. The women, one by one, allowed themselves to lean into the sensation, tilting their heads, letting water run through knotted hair, sliding down aching shoulders, brushing over cracked lips and dirt-stained cheeks. Some gasped audibly, the sound sharp against the soft background of dripping water and shuffling feet. Others remained silent, allowing tears to slip freely, their emotions spilling unbidden into the water that enveloped them. Around the bathing area, Allied soldiers and medics moved quietly but attentively, their presence a steadying factor. Every movement was deliberate and careful, an unspoken acknowledgement of the fragile balance between freedom and fear that the women maintained. Buckets were lifted with precision, water poured in steady streams, and gentle instructions were offered in calm tones, a stark contrast to the harshness and unpredictability the women had endured for months. These men and women understood, even without words, that this was more than mere washing. It was a rite of reclamation, a moment in which dignity, humanity, and selfhood could be restored piece by piece. Some soldiers exchanged quiet glances, acknowledging the gravity of the scene, their eyes softening as they watched the once fearful women begin to smile, laugh, and sigh with relief. Every small gesture, every careful movement, was met with a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quiet but palpable sense that the camp itself was exhaling a collective breath of gratitude and release. The women began to experiment with the water, splashing gently at first, testing its warmth, letting it trickle over their faces and hands, marveling at the sensation. Fingers ran through hair matted with months of neglect, tangling and untangling with care, relishing the softness and warmth that had long been denied. The tactile pleasure of the water and soap became almost overwhelming, a contrast so stark to the roughness and discomfort they had known that it felt almost dreamlike. Laughter began to ripple, tentative at first, then stronger, carried on the hot summer air, punctuating the otherwise quiet cadence of dripping water and soft footsteps. Whispers of encouragement spread through the line. "It's okay. Take your time, feel it. These small, carefully chosen words created bonds that had survived in hidden corners for months, and now blossomed openly, shared and reinforced by the sensory miracle of the baths. The emotional landscape of the camp shifted, imperceptibly but undeniably, as these small acts of care began to overwhelm months of fear and deprivation. Some women began to kneel at the edges of the tubs, submerging hands and forearms fully, marveling at the sensation of clean water over skin that had been parched and hardened. Others leaned fully into the pouring streams, tilting their heads, letting water slide over shoulders, necks, and backs. Every movement was slow and deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if they were reclaiming their bodies not just physically but spiritually, emotionally, reclaiming a part of themselves that had been suppressed or denied. The soft sounds of water hitting wood, of hands splashing into tubs, combined with whispered words, occasional gasps, and bursts of quiet laughter, formed an almost hypnotic rhythm, a melody of restoration. Even the sun seemed to linger longer over the camp, casting its light onto glistening wet skin and damp hair, illuminating faces that were slowly transforming from hollow despair into cautious relief, into the recognition of sensation, into something that resembled hope. Every woman approached the water differently, reflecting the myriad ways suffering had shaped them. Some hesitated for long moments, hands shaking as they let droplets fall onto their palms, letting the warmth seep slowly into their skin before daring to lift their face fully. Others approached boldly, splashing water freely over arms and shoulders, tilting heads back to let the cleansing cascade wash over hair and cheeks, teeth flashing briefly in spontaneous smiles. There were gasps, small exclamations, and quiet sobs, all blending seamlessly into the symphony of renewal, a chorus of humanity rediscovering itself after months of deprivation. Even minor acts, such as tilting a head back to allow water to run down the spine, or carefully wringing hair free of knots, became monumental gestures, small yet profoundly significant. Children, if any were present, observed from the edges of the camp, their eyes wide with fascination. Mothers, elders, and sisters splashed in the water, faces radiant with a mixture of disbelief and joy, and the innocence of youth was mirrored in their gazes. The texture of wet hair, the smoothness of water on skin, the warmth after months of cool deprivation, these sensations were magnified for the women and reflected in the children's silent awe. Every tiny movement, every ripple of water, was magnified in its significance, every splash carrying a message that care, that human compassion could exist even in the harshest circumstances. Hands that had once known only labor, deprivation, and struggle began to rediscover softness, dexterity, and gentle touch. Fingers ran over skin and hair with newfound confidence, exploring textures that had been alien for months. The interplay of sensation, the cool wetness of water, the warmth of soap, the friction of scrubbing hands, became almost overwhelming, a full-bodied recognition of life and sensation that was at once exhilarating and tearful. Steam curled in delicate ribbons around wooden bathing platforms, carrying with it the aroma of wet wood and soap, creating a sensory cocoon that enveloped both women and medics in a shared, sacred moment. Faces that had been etched with fatigue, worry, and silent despair now reflected subtle smiles, glimpses of wonder, fleeting laughter, and tears of both relief and disbelief. By mid-morning, the line of women had grown significantly. Hesitation had given way to cautious confidence, and the once uncertain atmosphere had shifted into something quietly celebratory. Whispers of encouragement, soft laughter, gentle splashes, and exclamations of delight formed a rhythm that spread across the camp. The medics and soldiers, aware of the significance of this transformation, moved with care, replenishing water, offering towels, guiding where necessary, but always allowing the women to take ownership of the process. Every drop of water, every gleam of sunlight on wet skin, every sigh of relief carried the weight of months-long suffering, each small act of cleansing a symbolic reclaiming of dignity, humanity, and control. By noon, the air was heavy with steam and the sweet, almost intoxicating scent of freshly lathered soap. Women leaned against tubs, laughing softly, helping each other untangle hair, wiping cheeks, drying hands. Small groups formed, whispering stories, sharing memories, marveling at sensations they had long forgotten. The camp had transformed from a place of oppressive stillness and despair into a living tableau of human resilience, a symphony of hope, care, and rediscovery. Even the sunlight, harsh as it had been in previous months, now illuminated faces with warmth, catching the water droplets that clung to skin and hair in a glittering display reminiscent of fragile jewels. Every movement, every expression, carried the weight of months of deprivation and the release of rediscovered sensation, creating a living, breathing testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. By late afternoon, the camp had transformed in ways that would have seemed impossible just hours before. The once muted air, heavy with despair and the faint metallic tang of exhaustion, now carried a vibrant, almost electric energy, as though the simple act of bathing had awakened something long dormant within these women. Every face told a story, etched with the lines of survival and endurance, yet softened by the relief and comfort that now enveloped them. The water, once a scarce and coveted commodity, had flowed freely into wooden tubs and barrels, creating small pools that reflected the pale, late-day sunlight. Steam curled lazily above these pools, rising in delicate tendrils that carried the faint scent of soap, clean wood, and warm earth. The air, once stifling and oppressive, now seemed lighter, infused with whispers, laughter, and the occasional soft sigh of astonishment. The women moved more freely than they had in months, limbs unburdened by the sticky filth of prolonged deprivation, bodies tentative but gaining strength with every splash, every gentle scrub, every warm rinse. Some women knelt beside the barrels, letting water flow over their forearms and hands, marveling at the sensation, fingers flexing and flexing, as though testing whether the softness and warmth were truly real. Others leaned fully under the wooden spouts, tilting heads back, letting the streams wash over shoulders, down their necks, cascading across chests and torsos, taking with them the grime, sweat, and fatigue of months of captivity. The sensation of warm water against skin was almost dizzying in its novelty. It was a small miracle in a place that had known little mercy. Tiny droplets scattered into the dirt below, forming little pools that reflected the glimmering sunlight, each droplet a microcosm of relief, of release, of renewal. Laughter bubbled up spontaneously from some women, pure and fragile, slipping from lips that had known too little joy. Tears trickled freely from others, tracing paths through wet hair and down cheeks, unimpeded and unashamed. The mixture of laughter and sobs created a cadence that defined the afternoon, a rhythm of rebirth, a testament to the simple but profound power of care. Soldiers and medics moved among the women, attentive yet unobtrusive, their hands steady as they refilled barrels, offered towels, and guided where necessary. Their presence was a constant reassurance, a reminder that this sanctuary of cleanliness and dignity was real, sanctioned, and permanent, at least for now. The medics' eyes were soft, reflecting understanding, compassion, and even awe at the resilience displayed by the women in their care. They exchanged quiet words with one another, gestures subtle, smiles small but genuine, fully aware that they were witnessing not merely a hygienic ritual, but an extraordinary act of human restoration. Every gesture, from the careful pouring of water to the gentle offering of a cloth, carried immense significance, a delicate acknowledgement of the suffering endured and the fragile reclamation of dignity. Even the sunlight seemed to take part in this ceremony, casting its golden glow across glistening skin, highlighting strands of wet hair, illuminating tears and smiles alike, turning every movement into a small, sacred performance of human endurance and revival. The women themselves began to interact more boldly, forming small clusters as they helped one another wring out hair, smooth damp clothing, and rinse away lingering grime. Each touch was careful, deliberate, filled with the unspoken understanding of shared suffering and mutual support. Soft words of encouragement were exchanged, whispers that floated above the gentle splashing of water. "Hair, let me help you. Hold still for a moment. Yes, that's right." These tiny acts of solidarity created a network of connection, a human web that had been frayed by months of isolation and hardship. They laughed quietly at shared memories, at the absurdity of taking such delight in water, soap, and warmth. But that laughter, though subdued, carried with it a resonance of freedom, of reclaiming something that had been stripped away for far too long. Some leaned against one another, shoulders touching, sharing the warmth of body and heart, finding in proximity a comfort that words could not fully convey. Meanwhile, the bathing stations themselves had become a scene of vibrant motion. Water glimmered as it cascaded from barrels into tubs, droplets flying into the air before settling into puddles on the dirt floor. Soap lathered in thick clouds, clinging to arms, hair, and shoulders, creating ephemeral patterns that sparkled in the sunlight. Steam curled and drifted lazily, creating a hazy cocoon that softened the edges of the wooden structures, the tattered barracks, and the uneven ground, transforming the harsh landscape of the camp into something that resembled a sanctuary, a temporary refuge of warmth, cleanliness, and dignity. Every splash, every wave of soap, every bead of water carried with it a sense of small triumph, A declaration that despite months of hardship, despite the cruelty of circumstance, the human spirit could still respond to kindness, to care, to attention. Some women experimented with the water in playful ways, tentatively at first, then with increasing freedom. Fingers trailed across wet skin, brushing over hair, shoulders, and arms, marveling at sensations that had been absent for months. A few even began to splash each other softly, laughter ringing through the air, infectious and unrestrained, mingling with the ambient sound of dripping water and murmured encouragements. Others sat at the edges of the tubs, letting the water lap at their feet, watching sunlight catch on the ripples and droplets, creating tiny rainbows and prisms that seemed almost magical. These were moments of wonder, of rediscovery, of the sheer delight in something so elemental yet so profoundly restorative. As the afternoon wore on, the psychological transformation became as evident as the physical. Eyes that had grown hollow with months of fear and deprivation now glimmered with cautious hope. Faces once etched with tension and despair softened into expressions of quiet relief, curiosity, and wonder. Women moved with greater confidence, their movements no longer hesitant but assured, fluid, and intentional. Some clasped hands with one another in solidarity. Others shared soft smiles with medics and soldiers, their gratitude unspoken yet palpable. Even small, seemingly mundane gestures, a hand raised to wipe water from an eye, a shoulder nudged gently into place, a shared laugh at a dropped bar of soap, became acts charged with meaning, symbols of resilience, connection, and reclaimed humanity. The camp itself seemed to breathe with the collective energy of the women, soldiers, and medics. The once stifling, dusty air carried the mingled aromas of soap, warm skin, wood, and earth, creating an atmosphere of comfort and renewal. Dust motes danced in sunbeams, drifting lazily over the scene, illuminated by shafts of light that lent a painterly quality to every movement. The rhythmic sound of water dripping, lapping, and splashing created a quiet symphony, harmonizing with laughter, whispered words, and occasional gasps of delight. Even the battered wooden structures seemed softened in the glow of the afternoon, their harsh lines blurred by the mist of steam, the golden light, and the gentle energy of transformation that had taken root in the camp. By late afternoon, every woman had bathed, and the collective sense of relief was tangible. Clothes, once stiff, grimy, and clinging to bodies, had been washed and spread to dry, flapping like banners of survival in the gentle breeze. Hair, once matted and tangled, now hung in damp but soft strands, catching the light, glistening as it fell over shoulders and backs. The air was filled with quiet conversation, laughter, and the occasional burst of exclamation, as women shared observations, small victories, and whispered gratitude. The camp, scarred by months of deprivation, cruelty, and neglect, now held a heartbeat, steady and alive, pulsing with the triumph of human care and compassion. Some women lingered at the edges of the baths, hands still trailing through water, fingers tracing patterns on the surface, watching sunlight catch on droplets as they fell. Others assisted companions, helping to wring out hair, patting skin dry with coarse cloths, offering small words of reassurance and encouragement. In every gesture there was grace, dignity, and a profound acknowledgement of shared endurance. Even the soldiers and medics, though accustomed to hardship and suffering, paused to observe, their faces softened by admiration, empathy, and quiet pride. They had witnessed something extraordinary, the restoration of dignity in a context where it had been denied, the reclamation of humanity in a place that had known only deprivation. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the camp, the atmosphere shifted into a quiet reverie. Faces glimmered with water and sunlight, hair clung in damp strands to shoulders, and the faint aroma of soap lingered in the warm air. Women gathered in small groups, sharing quiet smiles, whispering thanks, and acknowledging the small acts of care that had felt heroic in a world otherwise marked by cruelty and neglect. There was laughter, soft and musical, occasional tears glinting in the sunlight, and the pervasive sense of connection that had been almost impossible to maintain in the harsh months prior. The baths had not only washed away the physical grime of captivity, they had also purged layers of fear, uncertainty, and resignation, leaving behind a fragile but unshakable sense of dignity, resilience, and shared humanity. By the end of the day, the camp had become more than a collection of battered barracks and dusty grounds. It had become a living testament to the power of simple human kindness, a tableau of endurance, compassion, and renewal. Every splash, every laugh, every sigh, and every whispered word carried meaning far beyond the immediate moment, a quiet yet profound declaration that even amidst the most harrowing circumstances, Acts of care could heal, could restore, and could transform. The women, once shrouded in months of suffering, now bore the visible and invisible marks of relief, faces glimmering, bodies lighter, hearts slightly lifted, and spirits strengthened by the knowledge that even in captivity, humanity could be reclaimed, even if for a fleeting afternoon, in the gentle cascade of warm water and the shared presence of kindness.